Hi, I'm Chris Coven. I'm the host of GCtv, which is a monthly program in which we interview leading general counsel about their rise to the role of the general counsel in their companies. And we also ask about their advice to other attorneys who would like to have similar success in their careers. I'm also the founder of In the House, which is a community with the mission of empowering in-house counsel to succeed by providing educational, thought leadership, and professional networking opportunities, and more. I'm delighted today to be interviewing David Slater. He's the general counsel of the Institute for Personal Leadership, which is a management consulting firm, as well as Hayden5 Media, which is a video production and staffing company. So I'm delighted today to be interviewing David Slater, who's the general counsel actually for a few different companies. David, welcome to GCtv.
Thank you.
Maybe we could start today by just sharing a little bit about the multiple GC roles that you play at your companies, and tell us a little bit about the companies themselves, if you don't mind.
Sure. Uh, well, what's really interesting is, through my participation in the House and some of the events, and you have like a very good program for general counsels that are in my position, which is basically having a few different clients at the same time, but still working as a general counsel. And so currently, there are two main companies that I work as a general counsel for. One is called Institute for Personal Leadership, and they're involved mostly in management consulting and executive training. Their clients tend to be large companies like Fortune 500 companies, and they get their business through the educational departments at these Fortune 500 companies, and they come in and do executive training, management. They have different programs and videos and seminars, and most large corporations now have educational departments to try to keep their executives well educated, trained in different management principles, and they're always striving to make them more effective and be better at business. So that's Institute for Personal Leadership. It was started by a Columbia University professor, Hitendra Wadhwa is his name. He's originally from India, and he also teaches business at Columbia Business School. And he teaches in the graduate program. He teaches management, and that's one of my main clients. The other one is Hayden5. They're involved in video production and also mostly video staffing around the country. And so if anyone ever needs a camera person in any location around the United States, they can just call Hayden5, and they have their vetted camera and other production people to show up at any event and start shooting right away. And so between the two of them, I'm kept very busy as a general counsel with both kind of garden variety general counsel type of work that all companies need, as well as more specialized types of intellectual property that are related to the services that they provide. So that's it in a nutshell of my clients. And I have a few other clients too that are involved in mostly some in the entertainment industry, an art gallery, a sound recording artist, but they're kind of more once in a while type of clients, as not the kind of the steady clients that need work all the time.
Well, great. Can you also share with our audience a little bit about the career path that you took as you rose up to the GC position with your current companies?
Sure. I had a pretty traditional start to my legal career. I went to Emory Law School, and then I got a JD and an MBA while I was there in a 4-year program. And when I came out, I always wanted to be involved in entertainment, media, and filmmaking, which I still am to some extent, even with my current clients, because they're all doing different kinds of media projects. And so my first job out of law school was working for a solo practitioner entertainment lawyer, where I got the basic education of entertainment law and copyright, how to do licenses and different types of agreements, and relating to film and theater and music. And so that was a smaller firm. And then I realized I was somewhat limited working at a small law firm. So then I joined a sort of a medium-sized law firm that was more broadly involved in every aspect of law, but mostly real estate and business. And I worked there for a couple of years. They were known as Fishbein Badillo, Wagner, and now they're called Cozen O'Connor. It's gone through many different kinds of changes. So I was there for like about 2 years and just worked really hard. As an associate, a law associate, working, crazy hours, 70 hours a week or whatever it is, and not having much time, but also getting the basic experience of a lawyer and billing hours. And soon after that, I then joined a smaller firm where I had more practice in litigation, and which I hadn't had. And at the medium-sized firm, I did just research and writing, and then at the smaller firm, they let me go to court and actually argue cases, and I did a couple of trials. So I would say I had a pretty broad experience background, somewhat traditional law, not at the top white shoe law level, but just kind of basic, grinding it out as an attorney in New York City and working for salary. And and then I started my own practice. So about like 4 years after I graduated law school, I would say I started my own practice, and that was a small solo firm. And that's where I started developing business clients and serving in a somewhat GC role for them and their businesses. And then along the way, I had a full-time GC position with a company called Gary Nolan Associates. I was also the chief operating officer. They were a nutraceutical company, and they sold vitamins and supplements, but also some consumer products in the health space. And that's where I got a lot of sort of broad experience as a general counsel and all the different roles and responsibilities of the general counsel. That was full-time for one client. And then about, I would say 10 years ago, I left them, and I started working mainly for different clients as their GC, as a part-time GC for each of them. And that's what I've been doing since.
Well, excellent. Thanks for sharing your background. Our audience is a mixture of fellow in-house lawyers, but also a fair number of people that would like to become GCs someday, that are aspiring to a similar role or roles to what you have. So would you share some of the things, maybe some things that surprised you about being a GC, things you didn't expect from your earlier legal practice, and whether good or bad?
Sure. In general, I recommend it. I think it's a great position. It's a great responsibility to have. Some of the advantages are that you're dealing directly with clients as opposed to having an attorney between you and the client. And so it's a great way to foster the direct relationship that an attorney can have with a client. And some of the positives about that is that you get to sort of express your legal opinions, your legal judgment directly with a client, and I think that's the key to the relationship of being an attorney. That's the enjoyment of it, that we cultivate these relationships with business executives, leaders of companies, company owners, and they're relying on us to guide them and help them reduce liability, help them in managing their company, giving them advice, alleviating them of their sort of their work burden, because most of them are very busy if they're managing a company, even if it's 10, 20, $30 million in revenues. I mean, it probably has 20, 30 employees, and depending on what the what the industry is, but and there's a whole host of legal issues and advice that they need, and if you can help relieve them of some of the burden, even the burden of them having to go to law firms and explain to lawyers that are not really familiar with their business, what sort of things they need to do. That's the real sort of benefit that we provide as an in-house general counsel. It's closer to our clients, I've often heard you mention that we're like the traffic cop, which is like a good analogy. Often we're sitting there, kind of surveying the whole legal and business landscape and figuring out what we can do ourselves in terms of the legal work, and then what sorts of things we need to delegate to outside counsel, and to a large extent, we're given the responsibility of doing that on behalf of our clients, and they're very happy not to have to be involved in that, and that's, I think, part of the important functions that we serve as general counsel for the companies. So for individuals that are interested in getting into in-house or general counsel roles, I think it's there. I think you have to strive for it. There are different routes in. I always recommend not going in sort of the standard route. That's never been kind of my career path. It seems like as a lawyer, there are certain doors that everybody's trying to get in, and unless you have some sort of stellar aspect to your legal career, on paper, basically, it's going to be hard to get in those doors. And, there are certain things like age also, which could be a factor too. Like a lot of these, even companies are looking for lawyers that are a certain age, from a certain law school, certain background, certain grades. And I think if you don't fit in that model, it's good to try to, go in some other door, either making connections to people working in companies. I mean, my route has been initially through basically people I know in my family connections, friends of family. My first big legal in-house position after the full-time position I had was basically a friend of our family that we grew up with, and they were working for an animation company, and they needed legal help, and I started working with them, and and then it's been referrals ever since then. So I think it helps to find business executives that owners of companies, CEOs, COOs, and all companies need legal help, and it's just a matter of getting out there and networking, introducing yourself, and doing work, and then doing really good work, and sort of over servicing the client, and then they really appreciate it, and do it at a good price, and make them happy, make your clients happy.
Yeah, I think thank you. That's really great advice. I know in my own, when I was an outside lawyer at a large firm, I sort of noticed in many cases that I had more experience than the people overseeing my work, and they didn't necessarily understand what I was doing. And sometimes I was overseen by non-lawyers, by business executives directly. And that was even more challenging for them because they were trying to understand what I was doing and how it fit into their role at the company. And I sort of found early on that spending a little bit of, or maybe more than a little bit of non-billable time getting to know their business and also translating the sort of legalese into the language of business really helps set you up for being perceived as the GC type of role. So I guess like you, I've had clients that then transition me into an outside GC role, and I found that that occurs naturally. So that's a great piece of advice, to think about those non-traditional paths. So thank you for that. A little more about the path to becoming a GC for you. Did mentorship play any role in becoming a GC, or in sort of your earlier career before you became a GC? And also, what role, if any, did formal education play in that transition to becoming a GC?
In terms of mentorship, uh, what comes to mind is that uh, the individuals that served as mentors for me uh, were just great attorneys that I've met along the way. Great attorneys that I've worked for that had a real professionalism and who I admired and respected for their skills. And I was able to experience even being a client in the hands of a kind of a masterful attorney, a litigator that's involved in a litigation that I was involved in, or um, other attorneys, kind of sort of more senior and experienced attorneys that that I thought practiced their legal craft very well, either for companies as their GCs or in-house counsel, or outside corporate lawyers. And a lot of it I thought was a lot of them were helpful as role models, and seeing how they dealt with me as a client, or worked with their other clients, and sort of their knowledge and their experience. And I started to see that a lot of what we do as general counsels, or even as attorneys, at the more senior level, is provide good judgment and wisdom about how to handle different legal situations, litigation, agreements, even within the in-house world, and working as a GC. It's an important part of that work is prioritizing tasks, and so because there's so much that needs to be done, it's often a matter of like figuring out what's important. It's always what's important, what your client wants, but then you also have to kind of figure out what else is important and make sure that's being taken care of. And
Right.
So in terms of mentorship, it's that sort of kind of, that level of knowledge and judgment that I've seen other attorneys working at, and that served as role models for me. In terms of like the formal education, I think, we all need it. It serves as like a ground base for everything that we do. Like, I mean, going to law school, I think you have to do it. And I mean, you need to do it just to pass the bar. But other than that, I think someone who's not working in-house and wants an in-house counsel position, I think there's a lot of continuing legal education they can take to learn about the in-house role, what's important. I think drafting is a major thing, drafting agreements, read some books on, different principles of drafting, and I forgot who they are, Brian Garner, and then there's this other guy too. That I think you really have to know a lot about agreements.
Right.
My own desire is to make agreements much simpler than they are. I get like 50-page services agreements, which are like a major part of being an in-house counsel. If your client is doing services for other companies, like my clients are, they're getting services agreements from major Fortune 500 companies, and then these things are very tedious and long. And if there's any way to simplify that, I do it. Sometimes there's my client wants to do a deal with another company that doesn't have a services agreement, and that's great because I can give them my 5-page services agreement. And I just think things should be kept simpler. So anyway, continuing legal education is taking courses that are related to corporate law, in-house law. I think those are great things for attorneys to do. And one thing you'd mentioned before about that we serve as kind of the translator or the communicator for the people that know less about law than we do. That's also, I see as an opportunity, because they don't know that much, the business executive. They're kind of relying on us to figure it out. And a lot of times they don't want to talk to the law firm lawyer that's, kind of stuck in the weeds a little bit, may not be able to see the overall picture, and they like that it's someone that they know that's telling them, that's kind of reducing it. And anytime you can take complexity and reduce it to the basics, I mean, their time is a premium. So if you can do that for your clients, I think you're doing a really good service for them.
Right. I think that's really good advice. And something you said reminded me of something another general counsel was telling me recently, which is that one secret to getting information about being a general counsel is to ask general counsel themselves. And if, GCs are typically very busy people with limited time, but if you ask most people about their career, they're much more willing to talk to you than if you say are approaching them to try to sell them on business or something like that. And so I found myself, and I think others have suggested to me that, sometimes a GC will take some time for a quick cup of coffee or a phone call just to sort of give you advice. So if you're a law firm lawyer and you really would love to be in-house, I really do think an important thing is to talk to multiple in-house lawyers and make it very clear, hey, I'm not trying to sell you on my legal services. I'm thinking about transitioning to such a role myself, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on how I might do that. So I don't know if that is something that you think might be useful, but I've heard that from other GCs.
Yeah, I mean, I see that generally. Like, if you can be less needy of something, or it's less about you wanting a position or getting in-house and more just informational, like you're just
Right.
kind of trying to get the information that you need, and then that just naturally leads you into those areas. And yeah, people, I think, are a lot more willing to share information. People want to, there's a natural instinct to try to educate or inform and advise. And, I'm always happy to do that. I'm also happy to give career advice to people that young attorneys that want to get in-house. And I'm sort of always, giving them similar advice as I'm saying now, to kind of take the CLE, join different groups in the bar association, your local bar association. There's in-house counsel groups, if they'll let you in. Some of them have more restrictions than others, but you can still get in. And the other thing is that, try to get clients that are companies, that are businesses, and start doing work for them. And if you don't know how to do something, then you ask someone, how do you do that? And you
Right.
research it. And as long as you know it better than your client, that's the important thing.
Right.
Your client doesn't have time to do it. They don't know it. So you figure it out. They want to
Right.
work with you. And if lawyers are very good at figuring out how to do stuff they don't know how to do.
Right.
That's like most of our job.
And most of it isn't rocket science, really. So like you had mentioned young lawyers just out of law school. So that reminded me of another question I wanted to ask you. So let's pretend we could get in a time machine and meet David Slater, Esquire, as he is handed his diploma. What advice would you like to give your younger self in terms of how to succeed as a lawyer, maybe how to become a general counsel someday? Any thoughts you have on that?
Sure. Well, I always think it's important to learn the business of law, and the more you can do that, the better. Even if you're working in a firm or some other area, I think if you can start to develop your own clients, I think that's really helpful. Even if it's a little bit pro bono. At first, I think some of my best clients have come from extending myself on their behalf without necessarily looking for, financial compensation, and then that comes naturally. If it's the right client and they're in the, and they're doing well and they have a good business and they appreciate the work you're doing, you'll get compensated for it. So I would say don't be so concerned about that at first. If eventually, if you're not getting compensated, then don't do any more work for that.
Right. Hopefully that.
But you can extend yourself a little bit on behalf, and so I think a lot of lawyers just out of law school don't really think about that. I think they just think about, I want to get a job, I want to do the legal work, I want to get paid my salary. But I think it's helpful for a GC role to start developing those relationships early with business leaders, executives, and because you can the sooner you start, the quicker you can get into really being able to work with them in a good way.
That's great advice. The combination of, try to take ownership and develop your own client base combined with you can figure it out, have the confidence that you can figure it out, I think is a really powerful combination. It reminds me of advice. I was thrown into litigation 6 months after becoming a lawyer, and I was the third chair at a trial. And that the first chair litigator gave me a great piece of advice. He said, every time you get a project, this was at a fairly sizable law firm, pretend you're the only lawyer on the case, even though there might be 10 lawyers on the case, and go to the partner, or in the case of the GC, go to your CEO or the client with answers. Say, here's how I would do this if I were the partner. Here's how I would do this if I were the CEO. And if you start to think that way, you become a natural problem solver. So it reminds me of that advice that I got that I've tried to live by ever since, all these years later. But thank you for that. Another reason we're doing these GCtv interviews is I think that there has not been enough light shed on the actual role of what a GC does. I mean, I think sometimes law firm lawyers think GCs are sources of billable hours, but obviously they do a lot more than hire law firms. So would you mind describing just a typical day of yourself as a GC and the kinds of activities you engage in and day out?
Sure. It's kind of extensive. The different areas of law that I practice in on behalf of companies. And interesting enough, most of it, I learned for the first time by actually just doing it, by researching it and doing it. So that kind of supports this model of that. We're problem solvers. We learn on the job, and we should feel somewhat confident that we can handle matters that we're unfamiliar with. If that we can research it and figure it out, and that you can have confidence in dealing with a client knowing that you're a good problem solver. You'll be able to, do what they need effectively. And they don't have time to do it, and you can do it for them. So you should have, I see a lot of attorneys sort of saying, I don't know how to do that. I can't do it because I don't know anything about trademarks. I don't know anything about service agreements. You learn it. You're a lawyer. You have a law degree. You can network with people that know things that you don't know. You can bring in specialists if it's beyond you, which is appropriate sometimes. But it's definitely, you have to do it at times. You have to bring in outside counsel where it's beyond your skill level. But there's a lot of things that you may not know that you can figure out. I mean, a great example, and this will answer your question about what are some of the things I do, is trademarks. I mean, I learned everything about trademarks from working with my clients. They need trademarks for this, service marks for that, and so the copyright website has great information. You can do it yourself. I mean, or the trademark website. Copyrights also trademarks. You can go to the government websites. I learned everything I know about, or most of what I know about FDA law for nutraceuticals and vitamin products by just going to the government website and reading all the information they have there. And so now I know 90% of what the expert knows. But then occasionally I have to bring in the expert. Oh, we got a letter of complaint from the FDA. We got to bring in the expert now. So, but typically a typical day is everything. A lot of it is service agreements, so agreements between your client and other companies, or any type of agreement, employment agreements. So you kind of have to know quite a bit about labor law. You have to know something about classifying workers. There's a lot of personnel issues. You want to know if a worker is exempt or non-exempt. And I mean, these are things you can research and figure out and know pretty well. To some extent, there are personnel people deciding these things, but in the end, they're coming to the general counsel sometimes for some issues, or if a work, and it depends on the size of the company. I tend to work for smaller companies with 20 to 40 employees, so it's not like they have really specialized legal functions. I'm the lawyer for all of these things. They're all, so I have to know it all, and then I do have kind of a Rolodex, if people still understand what that is, of attorneys I can go to on, like, for specialized matters, that, like, attorneys I trust and I've worked with over the years, and they're the experts in that field, and I can go to them if it's beyond me. So, there's the general corporate stuff, like doing incorporations. A big issue is forming companies. Like, do you want it to be an LLC? Do you want it to be an S corporation, a C corporation? What state to do it in? And how to save on taxes. There's a lot of tax issues that come up, especially if you're doing work outside the United States, and, like, you don't want to be, to what extent you want to be doing businesses in a certain jurisdiction and subject to their taxation. So those are other issues. All of these can be researched. You can figure them out. You have to go kind of deep into the issues to make sure you're making the right decision for your clients, or giving them the right advice. And lately, GDPR is big, right? And websites and compliance, making sure the websites comply with all these privacy and data laws. And that was a little confusing. Everyone was a little bit worried at first. I think the real fear factor in GDPR compliance has subsided quite a bit. It's like, nobody, most people are not getting fined. The European authorities are not coming to America to, but it's still something. If you can have a terms of use and a privacy policy that kind of follows the GDPR guidelines, you're better off with that. So that was a lot of work recently. And all types of compliance, labor law compliance, depending on the industry that your business or your client is in, you have to know certain industry rules. Over time, you sort of develop a judgment and a sense of what's important, what's not. It's almost like you can't comply with everything. It's like there's so many laws, and so you got to figure out where are the real hot, third rail issues for your client. Like, that's the stuff they can get in trouble for. And you try to be a good citizen, and if you see them going off, you got to let them know, no, you can't do that. Another big aspect is insurance. I'm involved in getting insurance policies for my clients, and I find it's really helpful to be an attorney doing that, because you're drafting the agreements with your clients' clients. So those Fortune 500 companies, they all have certain insurance requirements. They want $1 million general liability with a $5 million umbrella, or they want automobile insurance. Now they want theft insurance. I recently had one. They want $1 million theft bond, and then my client didn't have that. So it's good to be involved in the insurance decisions for your clients, so that, especially if their clients are requiring certain insurance. And I think judgment comes into play there too, because certain insurance companies are better than others. I'm not endorsing any insurance company, but I like Chubb. They're there for coverage. If something goes wrong, other companies, you got to kind of, you got to watch out for technicalities, or you got to argue with them. I never want to argue for a check where the client should have it, and that should be easy. So those are kind of like a smattering of topics that.
That's all really good advice, really interesting information. I'm going to just try to unpack it a little bit. I mean, one thing it seems like you're suggesting is, if you're going to be a GC, you can't be afraid to be a generalist. You have to be willing to learn on the job and understand that you're not going to know it all. But you also have to have a strong network, if I'm understanding you correctly. You need to know when to call maybe GCs at other companies, when to call on specialty law firms. And that's expertise, when to call someone and who to call. that's something that often at least I find, tell me if you feel the same way. Non-legal executives often don't have that Rolodex, to use your term. They don't know who to call. They don't know when to bring in a firm. And I think that's really important for GCs to know the who and the when, and,
Oh yeah,
and sometimes you can do stuff yourself. Sometimes you need to call on a specialist. Sometimes you
sure.
just need a GC at another company who's been through something you haven't been through and just give you a sanity check, right? So
Yeah,
I think that's all really, really great advice for GCs and for would-be GCs out there. Um,
yeah. I just on that point, we act as the general contractor. We're often being relied on to bring in special expertise and in certain areas, and we're in a better position to do that than business executives who don't, they don't go to law functions, they don't go to in the house meetings, for
right.
instance, and network with other lawyers, so they don't really know who to call when they have a certain type of legal problem. So that's a real value that we provide to our clients.
Yeah, I like that analogy, the general contractor, because they need a great plumber, a great electrician, a great carpenter, et cetera, et cetera. And that's really what we need is a toolbox as GCs. We need a great toolbox of not only law firms, but fellow in-house lawyers who can kind of be our backup when we need it, either formally or informally. So I think that's really excellent advice. Sticking with the topic of sort of succeeding on the job as a GC, um, share with us, if you could, any work habits that you've acquired over the years that you think has helped you to be a successful GC. And on the flip side, have you ever noticed any bad habits that lawyers might tend to have, and habits they should really give up if they want to make the transition to an in-house role or a GC role?
I mean, one thing that comes to mind on the positive side is I think it's important to meet with clients, and I don't charge when I meet with clients. I mean, that might be kind of an unusual uh, thing that I do, but if I'm having, I should say, if I'm meeting generally with clients about their business, just to talk or have lunch, and especially if they're picking up the tab, which they usually do. Um, I don't charge for that meeting because I find that's almost equivalent to marketing, and there's usually work that comes out of that because they're talking about the legal needs of their company, and then you're sort of picking up on that, and often it's even more direct than that. It's like, I need this, I need that from your client. So I don't want to make it difficult for a client to have that kind of meeting with me where they're going to be like giving me work, or meeting them at their office, and a lot of a lot of times I do that. I and almost always, invariably, there's work that comes out of that. So it's in my benefit, and it's in lieu of spending money on advertising, or like a fancy website, which I'm actually in the process of trying to make my website a little better. But so that's on the positive side, like, and that's sort of the principle of giving, and then you get back without even an expectation of giving back. It's like you're giving information, you're giving advice, and then in the minds of your clients, you become associated as, oh, this is the guy we go to get if we have a legal problem. He has good advice. We always want to hear what he has to say, and then it comes back to you. So without even the expectation of it coming back, it's good to give freely of yourself, advice and information to potential clients. So I'd say that on the positive side, or positive habits. And then on the negative side, I would say that, I mean, one thought I have is that clients are very busy, as busy as lawyers are. The people that are running big companies, or medium-sized companies, and have all these employees, they have all this work, they got to generate all this income, they have to deal with all these problems, all these clients, their business, and they are very busy. So I think, one of the things, and I've kind of learned this recently, is to the extent I can take work off my client's desk and just do it myself and not bother them with it. And most people think it's not a bother to ask the client, well, should we do this? Should we do that? Just do it. The client kind of appreciates not having to. I'm not talking about like really critical matters, but just kind of the garden variety stuff that the company has to take care of. Just kind of do it and try not to involve your client in too much of that activity. I think they appreciate if they talk to you less, actually, but in many situations. So.
I think that's excellent advice. Sort of these day-to-day decisions, if you can sort of, in a sense, make them for your client and then check in with them and said, I kind of assumed you'd want to go this direction, so I've prepared such and such with that in mind. I think they very often will just sign off on it and say, great idea, let's go. And then they can check a box and be done with something, don't even have to do anything. So I think that's really excellent advice. One thing I wanted to ask about, since you've made the switch from primarily being outside counsel to primarily being in-house counsel, sometimes I find when I talk to GCs that shifts their perspective on things. And I'm wondering if you now as a GC had a magic wand and could change something about the way law firms operate or multiple things, what would you wish for the future of the legal services industry?
When I look at what law firms are doing, what sort of interests me now, this sort of wraps up certain ideas of technology, and I see one of the big growth areas being in virtual law firms. I think this is something that's just getting started, and it's a whole new model of law firms. And I don't know. I don't know if this would be better for law firms and lawyers that work for law firms. But I see it as a trend, as a really a developing trend. This is it's moving away from the traditional law firm model of paying attorneys kind of large salaries, and instead the attorneys work more independently, and they work through the medium of a virtual law firm. It's kind of an exciting area because it's new. It makes it easier to form law associations and law groups, law partnerships, because there's not that major expense of real estate for the law firm, and also associate salaries that for attorneys that are doing the work but not generating income. And this works for, I think, a lot of attorneys that are out of law school, maybe 10 years, 15 years, who have a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge. They're sort of tired of the traditional law firm model. Maybe they haven't made partner in the firm, and so this is a way for them to work, to keep more of their income, to develop business with clients that want to work with a law firm, as opposed to working with a solo practitioner. So it's a way to kind of avoid a solo practitioner stigma, which I don't think is much of a stigma anyway. But there are clients that want the law firm. So it's a way, and it also allows certain licensing issues to be solved. For instance, like one attorney's admitted in New York, but they have a potential client in Michigan, and so there's a Michigan attorney that can just look over the documents. All of a sudden, so now the New York lawyer can practice in all 50 states because there's other lawyers that can be brought in. So I don't know if it directly answers your question, but I see that as a trend. I think it's good for law firms to work with their associates and their lawyers with continuing education. I think that's good that they support those efforts. I'm for more flex time. I think quality of life is important for lawyers, and I see a lot of lawyers at firms and even companies getting sort of burned out. And if there's ways to make the practice of law more mobile, which I've done in my own practice, I don't have to be at a certain desk in the morning, and I can it's one of the advantages of my practice. And, my wife and I, we went down to Florida for February. I still worked. I had my laptop. I had my cell phone. I was probably working just as hard as I usually do, but in the afternoon I could go out to the beach. So,
Right.
I mean, that's unique to my practice of law, but I think it's, the more that I think big law firms and companies can think about the lifestyle of their lawyers and improving their quality of life, I think that's a good direction to go in.
Right. It sounds like you're talking sort of about the gig economy coming to the legal profession in some ways, as is starting to happen, right?
Yes, exactly. Like
That could be
working more on an independent contractor basis, and you keep more of what you earn, and but you also have to make it on your own. You have to develop the clients and develop the business on your own. So there's pluses and benefits. But if you can develop business on your own, you're better off being a contractor and keeping more of the income to yourself.
right. Now that's really, we'll watch that space because it's very interesting, some of the developments, and it reminds me of when I was just a very young attorney, one of the big partners was with one of their big clients, and we walked into the marble lined lobby together of this law firm, and the client said, "I'm glad you're putting my money to good use on this beautiful marble lobby with just a little bit of
A
twist."
Picasso painting hanging in the background, those beautiful flowers. Yeah.
Glad you're putting all those legal fees to good use. But I mean, they were kidding, but they also weren't kidding. So it's. I think clients have always sort of felt, sort of mixed feelings about these beautiful facilities that some of the big firms have. So, but that's great. And, I agree with you. That's a really interesting development. We've been talking a little bit about how law firms might evolve. What about the way companies build legal departments, hire in-house counsel? Do you have any thoughts on trends in that area, and maybe improvements that maybe could happen to the way companies find lawyers and hire lawyers?
Sure. One area that I see that's growing is that larger companies have done this, where they have developed their own, essentially in-house law firms. I mean, that's what in-house attorneys are, and general counsels. But I think there's more mid-sized companies, small companies, that haven't done that. They're still, to a large extent, relying on outside law firms to do a lot of their work. They're not necessarily educated as to the value that an in-house attorney, an in-house general counsel can provide. I see that as an area where smaller and mid-sized companies that don't have in-house counsel, I almost think a case can be made for any kind of company that's a mid-sized company under $100 million revenue, or even under 20 million, or even starting out at 5-10 million revenue, that they can I can make a case that almost all of them can benefit from having an in-house counsel. In terms of both reducing liability, reducing risk, making sure they have the right insurance policies in place, negotiating agreements probably at a lower rate than outside counsel, because outside counsel, they don't have the full picture of what the client wants, and they charge, much higher rates, and taking care of a company's trademarks, certain things that are neglected, corporate record keeping. It's kind of tedious, but it's important that it's taken care of. And then a lot of times, I believe that a company will benefit by having a good in-house counsel, because that in-house counsel can alleviate and can relieve the executives of a lot of the burdensome work that they may have to do. If they can delegate that to the attorney, they're more free to go out and get business or do what they need to do to kind of make their company successful. And what's tedious for them could be kind of exciting for the in-house counsel to do. I'm talking about like negotiating deals, meeting with other business people, and an attorney becomes an in-house trusted advisor to work on behalf of the CEO, and it's very helpful for them. And if they're making, lots of revenues and doing well, then they can afford that. And it doesn't just make sense financially. It makes sense from relieving themselves of a lot of burdens that they have, of being able to delegate certain things, being able to research certain things that they don't have time for. I mean, one example is I get involved in the estate planning of the CEOs I work for. I don't do it myself, but they're too busy to do it. So I say, you got to go to this firm, go to this lawyer. You need to do some estate planning. So many of them kind of have areas of their lives they've kind of neglected that way. And I'm trying to, always, so I would say that's a big trend, sort of, mid-sized law firms, mid-sized companies and smaller companies can always benefit from an in-house counsel.
That's really fantastic advice. I mean, I sometimes think about it, and I've heard others phrase it in this way. An in-house lawyer or a GC, their expertise is keeping you out of trouble. The expertise of most outside law firms, particularly larger ones, is to get you out of trouble after you're kind of pretty deep.
That's true. Yeah.
If you rely solely on outside law firms, they're really, frankly, their pecuniary interest is to help you out of big problems. And then I'm not saying that they would ever want you to be in those kind of issues, but it's just not quite their sweet spot in terms of their specific day-to-day expertise. But very much that's the day-to-day expertise of a GC, that sort of legal risk management. See the warning signs before you get too close and help to avoid those issues in the first place. So that seems to be part of what you're suggesting here.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a conflict of interest for the big law firm that's involved in litigation, because their interests, not that they would do it, and many are ethical, but but their interest is obviously to keep the litigation going, and that's their financial interest to a large extent. If they have a lot of litigation work with a client, then maybe that's less of an issue. But if it's their one litigation with that client, they're better off keeping that going and billing for that. And as an in-house counsel, you're kind of more you're more aligned with the interests of the company. I think they're paying you whatever model they're paying you under. It's more aligned to what they need. You don't.
Right, you're trying to maximize results and minimize billable hours, not maximize billable hours for right. So it's a very different alignment, right? It's a very good.
You're closer, and you're mentally closer to what the executives want. It's not like you're some independent law firm that is not as attuned to what the client wants. You're right in there. You're meeting with the client. You know what they want. That's your basic purpose, is to kind of service what they want.
Right. Well, that's why I call in-house lawyers and GCs and other in-house lawyers the most important people in the legal field, because they're the closest to the client. They're not necessarily better lawyers or better people, but they're literally embedded with the client, and therefore their needs and priorities need to come first. And in my opinion, the outside law firms need to be facilitating what they're trying to achieve as GCs. So we touched on a little bit technology, and I'm interested in your thoughts about how do you think technology is going to affect GCs and other in-house lawyers going forward? And are there any sort of tech hacks or other technology that you found particularly useful in your own work as a GC?
Mm-hmm. I'm a little bit of a traditionalist when it comes to technology. I'm definitely not the earliest adopter of technology, and I tend to be resistant of it. And I'm just trying to be honest about this. I mean, there are technologies that are helpful. But my rule is kind of like if it takes a long time to learn the technology, and if it's glitchy and it doesn't really significantly advance the practice of law with your client, then it could be kind of a waste of time. Like I think I've seen discussions in the House that you've been involved in where it's the latest kind of thing is Slack, or some of these other technologies. I mean, if everybody's using it, then I use it. But I'm not a big fan of having to learn a new technology. I'm very happy. I use Word for like 95% of what I do. Well, no, I should say Outlook too.
Right.
Between Outlook and Word, that's about 90% of what I do, and about half on each. And I know those systems. I know them kind of deep just from years of using them. And if I have to switch to another technology, there's that learning curve. So I think it's got to really serve an important function. Sometimes I'm forced to, like when I have to edit documents online, like some of my clients like use Google Docs or other where the documents online, it's not in Word. And I gotta, how do I do this? How do I
Right.
italicize? Formatting is like impossible. And I just,
Well, if you can be a little more of a technology follower, that's not always bad because someone else is sort of the guinea pig, and hopefully they get the kinks out before you're required to adopt it for yourself. Since we're talking a little bit about the future, what are some of your thoughts? If you look into your GC crystal ball, what do you think some of the challenges facing GCs are going to be in the next 5 or so years?
one challenge that I see that's coming up is, and this might just be on the fringes right now, but it seems to be, it's kind of scary, and it seems to be growing, is that GCs are getting pulled in with their clients on law enforcement activities by the government, investigations, and sometimes they're becoming targets, and they're leverage points for these government investigations. I saw that recently with the pharmaceutical company, the Jeffrey Skellig or something. They brought his lawyer in because they said his lawyer was sort of participating in the schemes, and um, there is, and I'm not sure whether, you know, uh, in these cases, the lawyers really deserve to be pulled into these law enforcement dragnets. And it used to be in the past that I think that, attorneys were left out of it. We were we were the advisors to the companies. The attorney-client privilege was highly respected and sacrosanct, and nothing was done to interfere with that. But I think more and more they're trying to, you know, enforce these exceptions to the attorney-client privilege, especially where they can try to show that an attorney was actively involved in the criminal acts on behalf of the client, or counseling them how to do it. And I think there's a real gray zone there. I think right now as attorneys, we have to just stay far away from that. I think, in the past, it would be easier if clients came to you with a legal problem, they were doing something illegal, you would say, just stop doing that. Now you have to kind of document it or something, and then your client doesn't want you to do that. They don't want something in writing from their lawyer that what they're doing is illegal. So anyway, I see that as an area of concern that's growing now for GC's in-house counsel. The idea that they can be somehow swept up in some kind of criminal act by their client. So I think now there's more peril involved if a GC is working for a company that's doing bad stuff. And, they should think about getting out, or, documenting more carefully how they advise the company executives. The problem is when the company executives don't want to hear that kind of
Right.
advice.
Very interesting, yeah, because you have that role as you're working for the company, but you also are chartered as a GC with being an independent voice and applying the law objectively to the situation that your client is in. And I think we've seen in recent history, there's been some CEOs who've been pushed out for various types of misconduct. And I agree with you that the good GC will be the one advocating that early, or either correcting course or finding someone who won't be engaged in that kind of conduct. So I think that's excellent advice. So we're near the top of the hour. I wanted to give you a last chance to sort of share any other advice you'd have for anyone out there who might be listening, such as aspiring GCs or other folks, that any other advice you might want to share with our community.
Sure. For aspiring GCs or attorneys that want to go in-house, just keep at it, educate yourself, network, and I think you will find it rewarding to do that. My experience has been people that work in-house tend to have a better lifestyle, which for me is more important. You know, that you that you enjoy your work. Um, and if you, however, if you're working for a big law firm and you like that, that's great too. So I just think that I guess the last thing to say is this advice: don't, if everyone's trying to go in through one door, like look for another door to get in, and there's other doors. You don't have to go in the same door as everyone else, and yeah, and working specifically as a GC directly with clients and business executives, it's very rewarding. You're doing a lot of good work that you can feel good about. So,
Well, David, thank you so much for sharing your own career story, as you grew into the GC role. And thanks for all the great advice to our listeners. And I really appreciate your time today. Thank you very much.
okay, thank you, Chris. Take
Okay,
care. Okay, bye.
bye.